Hello and welcome to the second part of this build. In the first part I've been preparing all the pieces, getting them off the sprue and painting them. I also tried to tackle some of the problems this model has. While being already quite detailed, it requires a lot of dry fitting and sanding before getting close to the finish line. It seems like this is a common issue with the headless models. Definitely not something I would suggest to a beginner. In this second part, I will be preparing the body of the tractor and most of the engine, using a number of weathering techniques that I'm now comfortable with and other not as much. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. I want to get through all the parts that attach to the engine block, starting with the air filter. With a bit of research, I noticed that the carburetor is missing some detail, and while I'm likely not going to add a fuel line or a throttle cable, I am going to add something that is usually quite evident from the photos that I have seen, which is the metal clamp that latches around the air filter hose. I learned from another YouTuber, likely Yunsmin's Garage, about this. It boils down in painting a strip of masking tape with chrome silver and apply it on the area where you need it. It's super easy and the effect is surprisingly good. This aside, Yunsmin's Garage is one of those channels that inspire me a lot and it's worth recommending. You can find a link in the description. I'm trying this out for the second time and wanted to see how easy it would have been to cut it, paint it and only then apply it, rather than painting it on the spot as I did the first time I tried. I think I rather prefer this approach as it might give a bit more control on sharpness with less risk of messing things up. I unfortunately cut the strip shorter than needed and had to cut an additional strip to close the loop. So I decided to revert to the other method and paint it on the spot. Nothing impossible, I just need to be very careful. I now want to get the steering wheel and the gear shift lever glued in place, as I feel like it will give me a better sense of what and how I need to do to weather the engine block and the rest of the body of the tractor. As with some other bits in this kit, I realized that the shift lever doesn't have a specific place it locks in, but it can be arranged in whichever position one wants. Cool, but at the same time, a source of a bit of frustration from my perspective. I would have rather had a clear place to snap it in. This seems like one of those things that were planned as an afterthought more than anything else. I also want to be clear that I'm trying to follow the instructions as close as possible, effectively trying to anticipate any issues but dry fitting pieces before gluing and sometimes even painting them. Sometimes, like in this case, I should have held back gluing the battery and the steering wheel on the dashboard, as it made adding the decals a bit of pain later on. But it was also impossible to have the dashboard in without gluing the steering wheel, so at the end, everything needed to be in at the same time. Okay, so as I have the gasoline, the petrol filter, which is this bit here, which should be copper. I don't have copper as a color. I'm gonna use a gold leaf. Seems to be fair to be something that I can use for that. Ooh. And I will proceed with this. It's a simple once this is done, paint retarder and I should be good to go. Cool. So next step, we have air intake, exhaust pipe, and exhaust. Yes, exhaust manifold and exhaust pipe. That's what it's called. I'm gonna be using these three beautiful colors, which is gunmetal, exhaust pipe, burnt iron, as you can probably see, and brown. Brown is already done, so I'm gonna use brown as a base. It's the first time I'm doing this. Before I was usually using gunmetal, so let's see how it turns out. I'm gonna start with likely gunmetal and do accents with burnt iron and taking from there, and then it's gonna be washes, perhaps some aluminum, because I do not know how light is the burnt iron, because I feel like it's gonna be, yeah. Anyway, let's go. And not to forget, I'm gonna use this beautiful applicator that I just created with a little bit of super glue and a sponge, which I carved out, and I'm not gonna show you the destruction of the sponge that I just did, because I don't think it's fair for the sponge, of course. Yeah, cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and assemble this, because I feel this needs to be seen all together. Now that I reached this point, I have to tackle the body, which is basically the whole engine block plus transmission and so on. The core of the tractor, in other words. This will be broken down in two main steps. The first one will be an overall chipping process using an acrylic whitewash and dark metal within it. It will be later followed by a wash done by some grey enamel that I have. I'll tell you more once we get there. As for the chipping process I just started, this is something I've grown quite accustomed with. It is overall a tedious process, but it gives an extreme level of realism for mechanical tools and heavy machinery that are frequently used and that can suffer quite a lot of wear. This method is mostly used for military vehicles. To give you an idea, just for chipping the surface of the tractor has taken me about 2 hours, probably a little bit more. The whitewash represents the first layer, exposing the underlaying base coat that is normally given to any machine before proper painting, and the dark metal is the actual exposed metal. If done carefully, this brings a lot of realism to the build, but it needs a bit of attention as it can be distracting or out of scale in some cases. In the past, while doing another Heller model, the Citroën H-Van, I had to redo the loading bay completely, specifically to address this problem. So, if you have some source material you can take inspiration from, it would make a major difference. As I'm done with the first pass of chipping, I realized the initial whitewash I used faded a lot as it dried. I also have the impression that overall some areas might benefit for some additional chipping. It looks like I need to adjust as I'm going. I don't have a very detailed or precise reference image, but just a mental image of what I want to achieve, how much old and used will be. Mostly based on a bunch of the pictures I found online, with the only difference that it won't be either abandoned, rotting in a field, or restored to a brand new state. My aim is right there, in the middle. So, here goes another painstaking session of whitewash and dark grey metal chipping. As a small break from the relentless and exhausting process of chipping you just witnessed, I decided to put together the intake filter, inlet manifold, carburetor and downpipes without gluing them to the rest of the body. I still need access to the engine block without anything on top. It will be quite straightforward later on when I need to get it back on. I finally reached the second major step for the weathering of the engine block. I have done so much so far, and yet there is still a lot to do. Based on the reference material I have, the grime and usage that is normally seen in the area of the engine block and near all the mechanical bits leads me to use the MIG engine grime weathering effect. The initial idea was to just use it sparingly on some critical areas and then brush it where and as needed. But the reality is different to what I was playing in my head, and since this was the first time I was using it, I ended up abusing it, to the point I had to do a lot of work of removing it afterwards, as you will see. One small note that is worth making. Up to this point, I knew that using an enamel-based color wouldn't have affected any acrylic layer beneath. This is one of the cool aspects that I learned from the tank weathering masters, if you pass me the expression. What I further discovered is that enamels take quite a bit to dry, let's say, one day to be sure. So, while it kinda felt natural to me as I was doing this, manipulating enamels while they're still fresh is a major benefit. So, with just a very little thinner, I was able to work them to the intensity and position I wanted. In contrast, there are situations where you don't want to touch enamels once applied. A clear example is the black wash that is used as a panel liner. Secondly, I was probably quite surprised how much this effect, used as a wash, enhanced the underlaying layer and gave some depth that I did not expect. Like a happy accident. I now understand the reason for those interior washes that I've seen used for military vehicles and ships. As you can see, I would have never expected such a result. And this makes me particularly happy. At this point I can finally glue the intake and exhaust system to the engine block and call it a day. So far this has been an incredible journey, but I am exhausted. As usual, if you haven't yet and you got to this point, please like and subscribe. In my next video I will be taking care of the wheels, prepping them for assembly and hopefully getting to the point of putting together the front steering block. See you next time.